Hello, my name is Crystal Alonso, and today we will be covering the Freddie Mac accounting scandal of 2003. First, we will begin on the background of the company. Freddie Mac is also known as the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, and it was chartered by Congress in 1970. It was established to support homeownership for the middle class. Banks are able to offer 30-year loans because Freddie Mac will purchase these mortgages and banks don't have to keep them on their books. The money received from Freddie Mac for the mortgages are used to give new loans to borrowers. Mortgage-backed securities are formed for mortgages that have been purchased, guaranteed, and securitized. Bundles with similar mortgages are combined to form the mortgage-backed securities that will be sold. Freddie Mac will then sell the mortgage-backed securities in a secondary market to investors. Freddie Mac provides a guarantee to investors that is also backed by the U.S. Treasury that an agreed amount will be received each month. The proceeds are then used to purchase more mortgages from banks. Freddie Mac receives an exemption for state and local taxes as well as from the rules that are imposed on financial institutions. So what happened at Freddie Mac that contributed to this scandal? According to the New York Times, Freddie Mac had understated its earnings by nearly $5 billion over more than 3 years, which resulted in an 11-month review of the company's accounting and led to resignations of executives and increased concerns by regulators and lawmakers. The misstatement of the company occurred in 2001 when there was a $1 billion overstatement, and then from 2000 to 2002, there was a $6 billion understatement. The reason for this was so that way future results would be more attractive to investors. The compensation of senior executives also helped contribute to improper accounting and managing practices, particularly those that were tied to earnings per share. The fraud was discovered when the audit company changed from Arthur Andersen to PwC in 2002. So who are the key players and executives who contributed to the scandal? They include the former Chief Operating Officer and President, David Glenn, the Chief Financial Officer at the time, Von Clark, the Chairman and former CEO, Leland Brenzel, and then the former Senior Vice Presidents, Robert Dean and Nazir Dosani. The important costly figures that are important to remember in regards to the Freddie Mac accounting scandal include the $71.3 billion bailout that was provided to the company by the government. The next fine was the $125 million fine that the company was assessed, which at the time was the highest imposed fine. The next figures include the amounts that were fined for the executive staff at the time. The SEC settled with the executive staff for different amounts. For starters, former President David W. Glenn settled with the SEC for $400,000. The former Chief Financial Officer Von A. Clark settled for $154,227. The Chief Executive Leland Brenzel settled for $16.4 million. And then Nazir Dosani, the former Vice President, settled for $136,663, and then former Senior Vice President Robert Dean settled for $99,658. Other consequences of the 2003 Freddie Mac scandal included the firing of the top 3 executives. The president, David Glenn, was fired for allegedly altering and ripping out pages of his notebook prior to handing those over to the investigators looking at the company's accounting. The retirement of Leland Brenzel was accepted, as was the resignation of Von Clark. The board members believed these 2 individuals were responsible for the accounting issues, so their departure was already in the works. Another consequence of the scandal was the fall of the stock price by 16% and the fall of their financial strength rating from AAA to A-, with the possibility of an additional downgrade. Immediately following the scandal, the executive compensation was frozen until it could be determined if it could be revoked altogether. Leland Brenzel was ultimately required to give back his $10.5 million salary and waive any claims against the company for a compensation worth of $3.4 million. Due to the scandal and others, the Federal Housing Finance Agency replaced the Office of Federal Housing Enterprise Oversight in 2008. The FHFA was the legal and regulatory authority to place GSEs into receivership and conservatorship. GSEs have a guarantee from the government that they will not fail. The Freddie Mac scandal has not only had an effect on the housing market, but has also had different effects on both the accounting field and the auditing field. This scandal and others have damaged the reputation for the auditing profession for failure to catch the accounting errors. In particular, the scandal contributed to the further downfall of auditing firm Arthur Andersen. Current auditing firms today will now have to pay closer attention to the company's risk assessment that is done on a company prior to deciding whether or not to take them on as a client. If a client seems like it may be a risky client, the auditing firm may now elect to not take them on as a client, as opposed to years ago when it might have taken the client even with the increased risk. With the increased liability that has been placed on the auditing firms may elect to charge higher fees to compensate for the additional liability that they are now taking on. Auditing firms have taken precaution in offering additional services to their auditing clients that may cause a conflict of interest or take away from the independence they should have when auditing, such as providing tax services in addition to auditing. So where is Freddie Mac today? Today, Freddie Mac's finances have improved from those in 2003. The Treasury has also reworked the bailout, and according to the New York Times, the bailout has since been paid with interest as of August 2012. In addition to that, Freddie Mac has also had stricter underwriting guidelines that it now abides by. I'm currently employed in the mortgage industry, and I have seen stricter guidelines by Freddie Mac. Some of those guidelines include obtaining strenuous documentation to verify things such as income and assets, as well as having minimum standards for the type of income that is collected. These are just some of the guidelines that I have seen while working in the mortgage industry. The following websites are resources I used to research the Fannie Mae scandal of 2003.